Well, hello. Welcome to American Reversion. I'm Steve Smith. This is the second of the day. This is a continuation because we had so much to talk about in the first one. Um, I had to continue it. I didn't want to shortchange you all, so I'm not sure if this will go the full half hour or not, but we'll see. We'll use as much time as we need. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to all the new subscribers, the new members, both here on YouTube and on Patreon. The special members on Patreon. As I said in the previous one, uh, I got up today, and there were a couple comments left on yesterday's, telling me that I should make Mrs. Snerdley a nice little fruity drink that some of the ladies like because out of appreciation because she deserves it. Well, she certainly does. I advised that particular person that I'm not much of a bartender, but I'd be happy to buy her one. Somebody else asked, will Mrs. Snerdley be making a personal appearance on the channel? And I said, well, she's kind of camera shy about that. But I have. So what I have posted over on Patreon a picture of Mrs. Snerdley with a fruity drink. And so that if you want to put a face to the voice and the giggle, Mrs. Snerdley, would you like to giggle just so that yes, she's getting all red in the face. We have so much fun. So you can add and put a face to that giggle and that intelligent voice. You can see her over on Patreon. If you're not with us on Patreon, we put so much stuff over there in addition to what we put on there, and we'd love to have you over there. The link is down below. Hit it, pay $1 a month. You get to see what Mrs. Snerdley looks like and get all the other stuff. So anyway, that picture was from her having her birthday, yesterday wasn't his birthday, but it was recent. Her recent birthday peach Bellini at the Buzzard Bar at Big Cedar. And it's down on Table Rock Lake. It's where we go whenever we get a chance. If you're ever down there and you haven't been there, you're around southern Missouri, go by the Big Cedar. I wished I could get them to sponsor me, but they don't know that I exist. So go to Big Cedar, and we love it. It's our second home, our home away from home. And go to the Buzzard Bar in the evening. Go after about 8:30 when the singing cowboy's down there, because he is just as funny as can be and a good conservative. But he doesn't play. What doesn't he play? He doesn't play Florida Georgia Line. He refuses to play anything by Florida Georgia Line
Frozen
or anything from Frozen. Now I'm with him on the first. I don't like Florida, but I like Let It Go. I mean, I find myself humming Let It Go all the time, right? Whistling it and all that. Anyway, so enjoy that. We started the previous half hour with a story about the collapse of America. And we started it. I won't read again. Maybe I will when we get back to it. But I had to cut off the previous one short because we were so full of news and things to do that I didn't get to the last story that I was going to cover in that half an hour. Is that our... Okay, so I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to go back, and we're going to talk about the collapse of the American empire. Okay, so anyway, the study was not a study, I'm sorry, the story here, Joe Biden's new Pentagon secretary nominee is Pfizer's former global project lead who blasted conservatives as nut job. Okay, raise your hand if you're surprised. I see that I have a smart audience here. No hands were raised. Let me read this. This is from the nationalpulse.com. President Joe Biden's nominee to serve as assistant. Oh, somebody said, I forgot to put on my mic again. I'm sorry. Mrs. Snerdley, it's her fault. She wasn't here to remind me to put on my mic. Mrs. Snerdley, I'm afraid you're not going to be allowed to leave anymore when I'm making these things. Because the quality of the broadcast depends on you keeping up on things.
You wait till I get home.
Well, okay. President Joe Biden's nominee to serve as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs previously served as the Global Project Lead at Pfizer and is one of the leading proponents of... You're not going to believe this. You've never heard anything like this before, and I'm sure you're just going to go, leading proponents of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender representation in the U.S. military. The National Pulse can. You are familiar with that kind of. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, okay. So it's not unusual. I mean, it used to be. I mean, it's not unusual, right? It's not unusual. Do you all remember Tom Jones singing that? Ooh, you almost heard me sing. We can't have that. The nomination of Brenda Sue Fulton to the Pentagon comes amidst Pfizer's continued efforts to secure emergency use authorization, EUA, from the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for its COVID-19 vaccine and boosters. Fulton, 63, was also recently blasted by members of the United States Senate for referring to right-wingers and let me back because I made a flub there, and so it makes it. Fulton, 63, was also recently blasted by members of the United States Senate for referring to right-wingers as anti-everyone nutjobs falling in love with a dictatorship. Well, that's who we want up there as Joe Biden's new Pentagon secretary nominee. Right? That's who we want. Boy, I tell you. I'm posting this. I will be posting this over on the Patreon channel. If you're not with us, did I already say I forget because it's the second one? We'd love you to join us because we put over there all the links to the stories that I cover here on YouTube and a whole bunch of other stuff in the Secret Club. Okay, now we're back to the story that I started the previous half hour with. And I'll kind of repeat something. And this is about the American collapse. Gradually, then suddenly. And the quotes that I started off with, I'll repeat because this is a second program. The first is a very, very famous quote out of Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. And the question is, how did you go bankrupt? The answer was 2 ways. Gradually, then suddenly. You'll keep that in mind as we read the story here, because it's applicable. Did you know, as I said in the previous one, Ernest Hemingway used to write for the Kansas City Star here in Kansas City? Yes, he did. That's why they call it the Kansas City Star. It was in Kansas City. I've never been a fan of Hemingway, probably because I was assigned to read him in high school. He was boring, and I hated it. Naturally, I grew up to be a writer. The second is from John Adams. And for those of you who watched the first one first, you can either tune me out for about 35 seconds or you can listen to it again. It's worth listening to again. John Adams said, "I do not say that democracy has been more pernicious on the whole and in the long run than monarchy or aristocracy. Democracy has never been and never can be so durable as aristocracy or monarchy, but while it lasts, it is more bloody than either. Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. It is in vain to say that democracy is less vain, less proud, less selfish, less ambitious, or less avarice than aristocracy or monarchy. It is not true, in fact, and nowhere appears in history. Those passions are the same in all men, under all forms of simple government, and when unchecked, produce the same effects of fraud, violence, and cruelty." Now I'm going to read a little bit out of this is from the Blue State Conservative. Read a little bit out of the article. Who wrote this? I want to give them credit. It's by Jim Quinn. Well, he must be a good man. I have a lot of friends named Quinn, and I like them all. Hemingway's famous quote about going bankrupt connects with so many because it is true on a personal basis and a civilization basis. It applies to individuals and empires in decline, like the American democracy. John Adams realized 2 centuries ago democracy was no better than monarchy or aristocracy over the long haul. We were handed a republic by Franklin and his fellow revolutionaries, but we failed to keep it almost from the very birth of this nation. I'll let him get away with that. I have contended, and I made a whole video about America has never been a nation. It's a country, but not a nation. The two are distinct, and maybe I'll get into that sometime here. Back to the article. As we rush toward our World War III rendezvous with destiny, aided and abetted by politicians placed in power by globalist billionaires hell-bent on the destruction of our way of life, so they own everything and you own nothing. I can't help but ponder who is to blame, and could we have avoided this dystopian outcome? The United States has been going bankrupt gradually for the last 50 years, both financially, intellectually, and morally. You shouldn't have said both because that implies two, but I won't be the English teacher here. So for the last 50 years, financially, intellectually, and morally. That's right. Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 and opening the debt window to morally bankrupt bankers and politicians set in motion a downward spiral accelerating at hyperspeed as we speak. The American Empire was born. If you all haven't watched, by the way, or if you haven't read The Fate of Empires by John Glubb, you should. You can get it, download PDF, I think, for free on the internet. John Glubb was a British officer, and it's an explanation of the lifespan of most empires. It's about 250 years. We are in decline. It describes the ascendancy, the birth, the ascendancy, and the decline of empires. And we are in that. You read it, and you will see exactly where we are on the decline. It happens for the same reason in every case. Fate of Empires by John Glubb. Okay, I'll get back to this. What was he saying? Nixon closing the gold window in 1971 and opening the debt door to morally bankrupt bankers and politicians set in motion a downward spiral accelerating at a hyperspeed as we speak. Yes, I knew I already read that. The American Empire was born in the shattered global debris of World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which left the U.S. dollar as the dominant currency in world trade, specifically as the settlement currency for all oil transactions. The empire has been sustained by currency supremacy, military might, and until 1980, manufacturing superiority. Once the most highly educated nation on the planet, decades of lowering the bar, less than mediocre union teachers, and replacing education with indoctrination has created generations of ignorant zombies, incapable and uninterested in critical thought. I can hear you all applauding out there now, aren't you? That's exactly right. I'm going to read that one more time because I know you want to hear it. I would. The empire has been sustained by currency supremacy, military might, and until in 1980, manufacturing superiority. Once the most highly educated nation on the planet, decades of lowering the bar, less than mediocre union teachers, and replacing education with indoctrination has created generations of ignorant zombies, incapable and uninterested in critical thought. Mrs. Snortley, do you know any ignorant zombies yourself, personally?
Maybe one.
Maybe one. She comes home every day telling me about the ignorant zombies she's had to deal with. The road to bankruptcy was very gradual at the outset of empire, with the national debt topping off at $269 billion, 119% of GDP in 1946. In 1960, it had only grown to $286 billion, but it dropped to 54% of GDP. Rebuilding the world and being the dominant economic power paid huge dividends. After a decade of guns, butter, and welfare programs, the debt grew to $398 billion, but continued to drop as a percentage of GDP to 35% in 1971. I know these numbers are just realize things are getting better. Okay. After decoupling from gold, the national debt soared to $908 billion by 1980. Inflation surged to 15%, and that's Paul Volcker, had to raise interest rates to 20% to avert disaster. Do you all remember those years coming out of Carter? 20% interest rates. What happened over the next 40 years was mind-boggling in its recklessness, short-sightedness, and acquiescence to the Wall Street cabal. These decade-by-decade increases were obscene. I won't make them, but I'll post this over on the Patreon channel, and today that has now grown to $30 trillion, making 130% of GDP. You can't sustain that. Let's see if there's anything else here. Rogoff and Reinhardt postulated in 2010 that once a country passes 90% of GDP, when did that happen? In 2010. Economic growth slows dramatically and the chances of financial crisis increases exponentially. With annual GDP growth of about 2% since 2010, their theory has proven accurate. Now we approach the existential financial crisis, which could initiate the going bankrupt suddenly phase of our empire of debt. Yep. Okay. American money was never more sound or banking more free than 200 years ago, said Lou Rockwell. Since then, it's been a long, steady decline from the gold standard in competitive banking to our Fed-run system of inflated paper currency, deposit insurance, and perpetually shaky banks on the dole. This article is lengthy. We are now our deficit, our debt is now at 30 trillion. And our deficit is running at 130% of GDP. There's no way coming back for that. You have to start over again, or you have to have a war to blame it on and start over again, and we know what direction that is going, right? Okay, I'm going to post this over because this is one of the best articles that I have read about this. I hope you all will go read it, and I hope that you'll share this with your friends. Print it out. Have it with you so that you have these figures, these numbers. I know that figures and numbers can be boring if they're just talked about. But if you can put a couple of these figures in your head so that you have them available when you're talking to your friends, that's how we try to make changes. Remember that the other side has made changes by talking. We hope to be able to make changes by talking so that we don't have to make changes in other ways. Isn't that right? That's right. Well, you all, it's been great to be with you today. I will post these things up over there. Mrs. Snerdley, would you like to say goodbye?
Goodbye. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. And she thanks you all for wishing her the happy birthday. Go check out her picture over there. You're going to get a kick out of it. Remember, America needs a reversion. It needs you to be a part of it, or whatever it needs. It needs you to be a part of it. Share this with your friends. Please make sure that you give us a thumbs up. It helps. Make sure that you are subscribed, and we will see you tomorrow.